We need not think alike to love alike. For decades, Unitarians have been incorrectly attributing this aphorism to Francis David of the 16th century. He lived in Transylvania, and he's considered the father of Unitarianism in Europe. It is likely that the quote is more directly linked to John Wesley, Methodist, father of Methodism of the 18th century, who in a sermon posed the ecumenical question, though we cannot think alike, may we not love alike? A bit more provocative is the possibility that the quote originated with Michael Servetus, the nascent Unitarian martyr of the 16th century, who was actually born around the same time as Francis David. And Michael Servetus wrote, "It is harder to love than to believe." Of course, he wrote this in Latin, but I'm not going to attempt to read it in Latin. Servetus is a fascinating figure in our history and just on his own. And I'd love to tell you his story one day. But for now, let me say that I think Servetus's words emerged from his quest to understand why dogma was more important to people of his day than people were to each other. Servetus, as I said, was born in Spain in 1511, not long after the Spanish Inquisition began, and he was raised and educated Roman Catholic, but was aware of the cruelties visited upon non-Christians under the zealous reign of Ferdinand and Isabella. And it wasn't until he went to France to study law that he came across Protestant ideas, which compelled him to take a closer look at Scripture. Servetus came to the conclusion that the notion of a triune God was simply not reflected in the Gospels, and he further concluded that the Trinitarian doctrine was the only thing that differentiated Christians from the Jewish and Muslim people persecuted and expelled from Spain. So Servetus was convinced that an error had been made, an error in interpretation. Surely it was obvious that Jesus' teaching to love one another was more important than what he considered an erroneous belief about Jesus' divinity. And so convinced was Servetus that he began corresponding with John Calvin in Geneva by sending him his pamphlet on the errors of the Trinity. Now, it's not clear if Servetus ever had any idea what he was up against, but in underestimating John Calvin's intolerance, he got himself killed at the age of 42. And being burned at the stake was a harsh way to underscore Servetus' observation that it is harder to love than to believe. I think in many ways today, we humans find it hard to love one another and easy, even necessary, to believe in something. And religions remain doctrinaire and intolerant of outside viewpoints. Rooted in tribalism, it's our own human default to surround ourselves with like minds, like beliefs, like politics, like looks, like values, like hobbies, like likes. Today's social media platforms allow us to gather into echo chambers in which we group ourselves or associate ourselves only with those we are assured will share in all our affinities. What we speak into the group will be echoed back. Yet by living in echo chambers, we lose our perspective, we lose our tolerance for a different belief, a different viewpoint. We find it unbearable to have our values challenged at times. And without an ability to hold a difference in a group, we put at risk our ability to be in right relationship with others. Unitarian Universalism is a liberal religion, meaning we are not bound in our beliefs and practices by a dogma or creed. We are not bound by an agreed upon concept or language around God, nor do we share a common sacred text. Right here in this congregation, we have a wide spectrum of isms, from atheist to theist, intellectual to spiritual, Jewish, Christian, pagan. Pluralism defines us. Not thinking or believing alike defines us as Unitarian Universalists. But does love define us? Do we love our differences? Do we celebrate our differences? I want to share a story, an experience that I had that challenged my perceptions, and I hope it will translate. It challenged my belief, if you will, that Unitarian Universalists do well with difference. In 2012, I was a resident chaplain in a hospital in Rochester, New York. The residency was connected with a clinical pastoral education program, and I, along with other chaplains in the program, engaged in learning, discussion, and processing of our experiences being in pastoral care providers to patients and their families at the hospital. One of our least favorite exercises was sitting with our fellow chaplains in a circle, accompanied by our supervisor. The purpose was to explore our feelings. I know, right? In a circle, exploring our feelings. That can be hard even for aspiring ministers. Anyway, we were to express whatever came up for us so that we could develop access to a complexity of emotions within ourselves, to be aware of them. And the upshot was to be more emotionally available to our patients, to have the ability to mirror or empathize those in our care without words, mind you. So there we were 5 chaplains in this circle naming our feelings. 4 of us, including me, reported being fair to upbeat. When the 5th chaplain shared, he said he was feeling pretty low. He had just done an overnight shift and had to respond to some acute situations. When it came around to me again, I changed my tune. I suddenly remembered my own struggle with events earlier in the week and started to talk about those struggles. When my supervisor said, whoa, hold on, Kathy. You just said you were feeling okay. Why are you telling us something different now? I couldn't explain myself. And she said, in a very loving way, I must add, she said, you minister, she said, I've seen it time and time again over the years. You have such a hard time when there is a difference held by someone in this group processing. I know you mean well, she said. You don't want John to be alone in his feelings, but it's out of place in this context. You can empathize with him without words or the need to change your own story. So I thought about that for a long time, and I think my supervisor was right. I think there is a tension for us as Unitarian Universalists in trying to live into our plurality. And I think it's a well-meaning impulse because we want everyone to be happy and comfortable, especially in congregational life. But that denies our plurality of experiences and worldviews, which will occasionally bump up against one another. We need to learn to tolerate a certain amount of discomfort and to lean into healthy conflict. And healthy conflict is out front. It is speaking directly to the person with whom you have a difference. And in that process, there is no need to fix anything in each other. We can let difference stand. And most importantly, on the occasion that we find ourselves the one holding the difference in some group context, well, then we must also be willing to hold our place of difference with grace and good boundaries. I talked a little bit a couple of weeks ago when I was talking about radical hospitality and welcoming the stranger. And I think that this, again, is a place where we tend to freeze up or forget how to be welcoming when we encounter difference, right? And I said that I try for myself to not deny it. That's who we are. We tend, we're, like I said, we're still rooted in that tribalism and our self-identity. But I try to say, okay, I'm having this nervousness, lean into it, but don't act from it. And the best thing you can do in the moment, the best thing I tell myself I can do in the moment is to be curious. Because curiosity is not an emotion. It's actually something that comes from your solar plexus. And to be curious will put you in a place of authenticity. And if there is something that you can learn from the stranger, something you can learn from the other, then it's valuable to take a breath and lean into that. When we are together, and in different contexts, we may have conversations with each other. The next time that you are challenged in a different point of view, I encourage listening to understand. Nobody has to agree on anybody others, the other person's point of view, and remember, nobody needs to be fixed. We don't need to change each other's minds. We just have to let everybody be heard. And know that sometimes, again, we may have to carry that difference alone. And I will submit to you humbly that I could be wrong, and that at times we all could be wrong, and know that sometimes it is harder to love than to believe we're right. I'll close in saying that in my short time with you, I have come to appreciate the depth and breadth of your gifts, your talents, your experiences, and your viewpoints. I continue to be surprised, had no idea you went to seminary, Elon. And I appreciate that you are an exemplar of gracefully holding a difference. And in all of our plurality, I see also a deep commitment to this fellowship and being in community with one another, and in making this very special, unique fellowship experience happen. And yes, there are practicalities in making this happen. And so, lastly, I want to applaud you in your generosity of time, talent, and treasure in making the stewardship campaign a success to date. So please give yourselves and one another a hand for your dedication to ensuring a Unitarian Universalist presence in the Boca community, where we need not think alike to love alike, and where we've been putting our love of humanity before creed for over 60 years. And may it continue to be so. We have been doing a few things differently in the service, changing things up here and there. And one of them is that with the Share the Plate program, or when we pass